Hey guys, it's Jeff. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing Dune by Frank Herbert. This is a science fiction novel that was released in 1965, and it's 516 pages long. The book follows two warring houses, House Atreides from planet Caladan, which are the good guys, and House Harkonnen, who are the bad guys. The story is centered around their feud over the planet Arrakis, which is a desert planet that is the only known place in the universe that is home to a spice called melange, which is very valuable, and it has clairvoyant and geriatric properties. So the emperor of like the galaxy, or just the main area of space that these houses live in, who's basically like their boss, the Padisha Emperor Shaddam IV, has just tasked Duke Leto Atreides, who's like the head of House Atreides, to take control over Arrakis, take control from the Harkonnens, because the Harkonnens have inhabited it for the last 20 years. The Emperor has just tasked Leto Atreides to take control of the planet in a secret plot to overthrow House Atreides with the Harkonnens, because he believes that they're a threat to him. So the core of the book follows Paul Atreides, who is the Duke Leto's son, as he takes his father's place after he gets betrayed on Arrakis. No spoilers here. It's predicted very early on that Leto is going to be betrayed, and his fulfillment of a prophecy that the people of Arrakis have, that someone is going to lead Arrakis into prosperity, because Arrakis is an entirely desert planet with very little to no water in some areas, and it's believed that one day someone will come to their planet to be able to turn it basically into a paradise with trees and running water, rather than the harsh conditions that they live in. Paul was born from the Duke Leto Atreides and his mother Jessica, who is a concubine to the Duke Leto. They're in love, but they can't legally marry for politics reasons, because the Duke has to stay single in order for, if he needed to marry someone of royalty in order to advance their status. So by all means, they're technically a couple, but legally they're not allowed to be a couple because she's technically not royalty. But Jessica is also a Bene Gesserit, which is an ancient sisterhood of only women who basically go through intense mental and physical training to gain almost superhuman powers. One of them being the voice, which is basically a command that they use with their voice. So if they were to tell you stop, you would be helpless to stop it. Your body would freeze up. And the way that they do that is, if they're in your vicinity long enough and they can recognize your speech patterns and how you talk, they can use that in order to command whatever that power is within you, in order to get you to stop, and kind of not really control your body, but almost to stop you from doing things, to command you to stop. And what makes Paul so special is that this prophecy basically outlines that he is going to be born, that he was born a male Bene Gesserit, which has never happened before and is really rare. Once on Arrakis, he's able to awaken these powers, and it basically transforms his entire identity, changes his personality, because not only is he able to do all the things that a Bene Gesserit can do, but he has this added power of almost being able to see the future, not directly I know what's going to happen tomorrow type of thing, but he can see within his mind different paths that the future could take based on other people's actions, and to almost to the point where sometimes he doesn't know whether he's in his own reality right now or if he's in the future, or if he's, in some other alternate timeline. It kind of messes with his head a lot. What makes this book really interesting, though, is even though it's science fiction, it focuses more on like human interaction, politics, rather than just really advanced technology and like advancing the human race. Which is really interesting because although they do have like these giant spaceships that they travel from planet to planet in space, they have interstellar travel. Their weapons are somewhat rudimentary. They mainly use hand-to-hand combat weapons like swords. They do have laser guns, but primarily in combat, every person will wear like a shield, like not like a shield that you hold, but like a invisible shield that goes over their entire body. And if you use a laser gun on someone with a shield, for whatever reason, those two don't interact with each other or don't like each other. So whoever's firing the gun, that like shield power goes back and basically blows them up, and it blows up the person who's wearing a shield. So if you shoot a laser gun at someone who's wearing a shield, it's almost like a death sentence for both of you. So it makes for some really interesting combat scenes because it's not often that you get to see like hand-to-hand combat in a science fiction book, which gives it some really serious like Game of Thrones combined with Star Wars types of vibes, which is really cool. But it's a little questionable because if you have all this advanced technology, you'd think that they would be able to think of a way to like bypass that loophole of, well, we've got advanced shields and we've got advanced weapons, but we're not allowed to use them against each other. It's really strange. It almost seems too easy of a, well, I'm going to make this book more interesting because to make it more like hand-to-hand combat, make it more interesting because I would rather not them, hiding behind barriers and shooting each other from far away. It does make for some great combat scenes, but it felt a little strange that civilizations like this advanced wouldn't be able to find a way around that. So Arrakis, or the nickname Dune, is a very unforgiving planet. It's entirely desert, and the people who live there value water above everything else. And the water that you have is not technically yours. It belongs to the entire group. So especially like within your body, if someone in your village or your military outfit gets killed in the middle of the desert, they go through a ritual to extract all of your water from your body and then share it with the group, rather than letting your body die there and having that water go to waste. And the planet is inhabited by regular people and also the freemen, which are like a desert dwelling. Well, it's everybody's desert dwelling technically, but the freemen are people who live in the deep desert and have made their living out there rather than, in giant communities. So the planet is mined for the spice that it harbors, which is very valuable because it's the only known planet that holds it, which is why it's so coveted, because it can make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. But it's also very dangerous because alongside all the people that live on Arrakis, it's also home to giant sandworms, as you can see on this cover here. I know it's kind of holographic, but like down here are like the size of people, and then this is how big some of these worms can get. For some reason, these worms are attracted to like electronics. So the Atreides, the Harkonnens, they have all these like mining facilities set up in the desert where they find this spice. And whenever they turn their machines on, they know it's a countdown until one of these worms shows up. So they have to get all their machinery on, mine for as much spice as they can, and then try to get out of there before this worm destroys all their equipment. Some of these worms, like this one, probably isn't even the biggest that's there, because some of their mining facilities, like if you can imagine like a giant factory, one of these worms just swallowed this thing up in like one bite. So they vary in size from tiny to phenomenally huge. But it's never really explained why they're attracted to all these like electronics. I think they're attracted to like movement on the sand. So like when characters have to make a long trek into the desert somewhere, rather than like walking in a rhythmic way, they have to kind of make it unpredictable because they figure that the sandworms can't investigate everything on the surface that's moving around. Like they figure it's just the wind, but what attracts them is this like rhythmic walking. So it might have something to do with like a constant, like they're hearing constant noise or constant vibration in one spot, and that's what attracts them. And then they eat it because they think it's some kind of like, if they think it's their prey. I don't know if there's anything exactly about the electronics that they're attracted to, which the book didn't really make clear on that, but you can kind of read in between the lines. I think that's what they were going, or what Frank was going for. So overall, I really love this book, but I had just a couple problems with it. One of the biggest problems being that it seemed like almost in every chapter, Paul kept mentioning this terrible purpose that he was destined to be for, or like he had a terrible purpose within him. And when it came time towards the end of the book, what he was referring to, or what kind of like realization that he was like, oh yes, this is my terrible purpose, I kind of read over it and I was like, is that it? And I read it over again. I'm like, I don't really understand what it is that he was so worried about. So maybe if one of you guys can explain it to me, I'm not really sure. But it was like, it was building up this entire book, but the whole book he didn't seem like a terrible guy. He was trying to do the right thing the entire time. But when he keeps mentioning this terrible purpose, I'm like, there's not a lot of pages left in this book. Like what is it exactly that he's referring to? So the punchline of that fell a little bit short for me, and I was kind of just like, I couldn't even tell you what the terrible purpose is right now, because like I read over it and it didn't stick with me. There were also a few times where the deaths of certain characters didn't have that much of an impact on me, even though you've heard about them throughout the entire book, or you've read about them throughout the entire book. But their deaths just happened really quickly. Like they were alive and then they're dead within the next page, and it was just like there was no buildup. It didn't really feel as shocking as like a Game of Thrones type death where any scene, literally anybody could die. It didn't really work that well for this book. So I was kind of left a little bit underwhelmed by some of these characters dying, and it didn't really give me much of an emotional reaction to how and when they died. I also had a really hard time keeping track of Thafir Hawat, Gurney Halleck, and Duncan Idaho, like what all of their roles were. I kept forgetting, like, oh yeah, who was this guy and who was this guy, even though they're all really like major characters of the book. I do remember Thafir Hawat being the Atreides Mentat, a Mentat being almost like a super smart human taking the place of like supercomputers. Essentially, they use the spice to like enhance their abilities and be able to plan tactical things really strategically and kind of work things out like a computer would. But Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck, even now, even after I've looked it up several times, I just cannot remember their roles. I know one of them was like a war master who's really good at planning battle strategies, and then like another guy was like a master swordsman, I think, teaching Paul and other guys how to fight, essentially. And I think he was like an assassin, like he was the family's assassin. But for a long time, those three kind of confused me, and I couldn't really keep them straight. The book also hints a few times at a connection between the spice and the sandworms, but no connection was ever made. And I was kind of disappointed by that, because I wanted some kind of like grand revelation of, do the sandworms cause the spice? They never say like how the spice gets there. It's just there. I would have liked to know, at least from the people that live on Arrakis, like, yeah, this spice happens naturally because of this process or something like that. And maybe the sandworms have something to do with it. That was never explained, which I was a little bit disappointed by. What is really great about this book, though, is, like I mentioned earlier, the Game of Thrones type politics within it, and with a mix of like a Star Wars type of world building, which is pretty damn cool. I did like at the beginning of each chapter, there's a like small summary of things that have happened in the past or things that were going to happen that were foreshadowing the story by the Princess Irulan, who is the Padisha Emperor's daughter. Throughout the entire book, I was curious about why, and a lot of it had to do with Paul and his journey to becoming this Muad'Dib, which is the name that the people on Arrakis are calling him, this role that he's supposed to step into of, bringing Arrakis into prosperity. And I was curious as to why, like, if the Emperor was planning with the Harkonnens and he's like essentially a bad guy, going against this Atreides family, why would, and you just, I guess you have to assume that the Emperor and all of his followers and his family are like in on the like rebellion. Why would Princess Irulan be tasked with writing so many histories about Paul and his role and things like that? And it does get it doesn't directly get explained. It's indirect of how the book ends. And read it for yourself, but I feel like the role that the princess played in obtaining that like responsibility seemed a little bit unfair. We don't really get a lot of sense of whether she was actually as bad as her father. In fact, it almost seemed like Paul was trying to help her get out of that family type stuff. But it almost seemed like it was the way that they kind of treated her at the end of the book seemed a little bit unfair to me, but whatever. So the ending was pretty good. It definitely left the series open in the future for more sequels, which I do plan on reading sometime in the future because I want to see where else this series can go after this book. So with all of that being said, I'm going to give this book a 5 out of 5. This is such a science fiction classic staple that if you love science fiction books, you're going to love this one. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next book review.